there's a man who says, who is God? And then there's a man who says, what is God? The first man, there's no hope for him, right? Because he he his question is wrong, right? He needs to rethink his question. Now, to the man who asks, what is God? We can begin some sort of dialogue with him, right? And when I say we, I mean I can, because I am that man, right? When you're when you're 13, right, you ask, who is God? Because everything that you know is something or someone, right? And by far, the strongest, most interesting things you know are people. And so your question is, who is God? And if you're Catholic, you go to catechism and they tell you that God is the embodiment, something very high, and which leaves you more confused. And so you don't have anything, because it's going to take the rest of your life to figure out what they just told you, and that's how they get away with it. It's not because they know, but it's because they bully you with big ideas. And then you get a little older, and then for the most part you get cynical before you get wise, right? Cynicism always goes before wisdom. And you say, well, screw this, I don't care. If God is so important, then maybe he ought to come to me and tell me why he matters. And and if you have any intelligence at all, right? You get to a place in your life where you come to understand that there are people in the world who don't find enough value in you to explain everything that they mean to you, which is to say that the fact that God has not come down to you to explain to you what He is does not discredit Him, right? Because then it'll discredit everybody else who hasn't done the same in relation to you. Some of them are your teachers. So back to the question of what is God, right? Now at this latter stage, that's when you get past your cynicism, your self-assuredness, right? And then you begin to say, hey, maybe this is something I ought to look into, right? Because I don't know, maybe by then you've been exposed to wiser people than you, and some of them happen to give this idea some validity, right? Until you begin to ask yourself, what is God? Now, now you have begun, right? Now you have begun, because you have come to understand that there are things that are not people, but that are greater than you, right? And when a man begins to acknowledge beyond himself anything of such power and grandeur as leads him to awe and wonder, he has set his foot on the path, if you will, on a search for meaning, right? Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. So this is where that journey begins for people who are not in Auschwitz or Srebrenica, or most people come to this awakening like Viktor Frankl when they're faced with death, right? When a bear is rushing at you in the woods, then you begin to ask yourself, what has it all been about, right? Or when, like me, your motorcycle is careening down the highway and you just discover that you have lost brake pressure, you begin to wonder what it's been all about. But for some of us, right, we find the privilege, if you will, to begin this investigation in a place of calmness and comfort. And I think that it's a great gift and a great loss and tragedy to the people who have but 4 seconds between the time when the pilot comes and says, people, fare thee well. Right? If I were a pilot and my airplane was going to go down, that would be my final words to the passengers. I would say, family, fare thee well. So I think that it's a great privilege to be right in the comfort of my home and begin the contemplation of this question of what is God. Because in asking that question, man has begun his search for meaning, right? Because I think that when you're six, right? Again, this is kind of like going from childhood through cynicism, which is really what adolescence and young adulthood is, to maturity, right? For me, what it means to be mature is to be able to appreciate that teleology is not ridiculous, right? Now, when you're six, right, you think the world is teleological because for you, everything points at something, right? Your mom's your mom's there because you needed breast milk, and your dad's there because somebody's got to ask who the hell is at my door when a stranger comes knocking, and you have the dog so that you might discover love and everything else, right? And then you turn 18 and maybe you read a little bit of Nietzsche and you don't read enough. And then you go on to read Schopenhauer and Kant and all the Germans and maybe some of the French, right? And then you tell yourself, it's all garbage, right? It's turtles all the way down. There's no meaning to it. YOLO, right? Is that what the kids say these days? YOLO? You only live once? And then I think that when you're a little bit fortunate, you you come back, right? Recapitulation. You come back to this idea that maybe there's purpose to all of it, right? And that purpose has you as part of it. So I'm trying to investigate what it means for a man to find meaning in his life. And I think that again, right? You could say, well, kid, if you are trying to feed a family in the midst of COVID-19, then you wouldn't be sitting here on this YouTube talking about what is the meaning of life, right? Was it Abe Lincoln that said that if he had 3 hours to fell a tree, that he would spend 2 hours of that time sharpening his blade? That's what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to spend 2 hours of my life sharpening my blade, because when I start to felon, I'll be felon, right? I think that too often we denigrate thinking, right? I got into a discussion with my dad the other day. I was telling him that that I think that there's value in. He was talking about how in Africa, I grew up in Ghana again, and in Ghana you have all these people who go to the colleges and they get all these degrees that don't serve them. And he says that what's the point? They don't create anything. They come out of school, and very often his is such an interesting mind that very often I will kind of take the opposite position and try to kind of like wrestle through it with him. And then I thought about how all of pleasure is discovery, right? All of pleasure is discovery. And all of pleasure also requires friction, right? And for me, that is what education is. Education is a man, right, being pulled through this matrix out of which he emerges refined. And I think that refinement process, even if nobody ever gets to taste of the man, that it's worthwhile. That it's worthwhile. Now, in out here, America, you could go out and get a degree in trumpetry, right? And now you say, well, now your ass owns $150,000 to the bank and to the government and to the loan sharks because you wanted to learn how to blow a trumpet. I mean, we got to draw the line somewhere. But I was trying to wrestle with my dad about the idea that there's value even in the education which seemeth without profit to the man. Why? Because pleasure is created, right? What is it for a man to have read Shakespeare, right? What is it for a man to have read Chaucer? What is it for a man to have come across the collected works of Immanuel Kant? It is for the man to have discovered all there is, really, right? Because for the man to whom these things are without value, there is no value, right? So-called transvaluation of all values, right? Only Nietzsche could come up with nonsense like that. It's beautiful nonsense, though. So, so I think that, when I was growing up, right, I was the kid who got shut up a lot, not just in school by my schoolmates, but at home, because I just wouldn't shut up, right? You're thinking, whoa, tell us something we don't know, Charles, right? And I think it was because the world was endlessly fascinating to me, right? All of it. And I didn't have enough bandwidth to support the thirst that was inside of me, right? Sometimes a man has greater desire than the world can meet. Now, what is the point, right? What is the point? Why do you want to know all these things anyway? What do they do for you? They do for me the only thing that can be done for a man, which is that he may see, that he may know, that he may understand. And by that process, maybe, just maybe, transcend himself. Right? Self-transcendence. Self-transcendence. The ability to escape the trap of embodiment, right? So man is embodied. And you kind of learn and read about people who are able to astral project, right? All these stories about people, right, going through the death tunnel and watching themselves and the surgeon and the nurses and everybody standing over them, and the sense of loss and guilt at the loss of life, and then being drawn back right into the body, right? Now, the anesthesiologist and the rest of them, they say it's because the brain waves are doing this, and then you put them back in phase, and as they're coming back in phase, there are certain brain regions that are correlated with embodiment, the sense of being in here, that there's a dissociation in that space. Yeah, it explains something, not all of it. I think that the whole point in life is to transcend oneself, is to be able to get beyond oneself, right? Because you're born into the world, and as you begin to grow in the world, we grow inside, right? We're like a radical, right? Like a plant, like a seed. We grow down into the ground, because that's the only place we have to grow into. And so we grow into ourselves, right? And it's like a corkscrew. We corkscrew into ourselves until you wake up and you imagine that you are this. And maybe you are, but that's really good evidence to the fact that we may not be, right? That I may not be this. So the man, right, he says something really interesting. He says that, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is God alone, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this, to love your brother as yourself. To love your brother as yourself. And I thought, to love thy brother as yourself. Now in mathematics, right? To love your brother as yourself, right? That as yourself, if you turn it into an equation, it'll be the equal to sign, right? So to love your brother who is yourself, right? To love your brother who is equal to yourself. And then I thought about how Vedic thought says that personhood is illusory. That the fact that I think that I'm out here and there's you, whoever you are, watching this, thinking along with me over this process, of being embodied, that it's all illusory. That is the projection of the mind. That the world, all of existence, right? All the way down to the Englishman who kicks a stone to make his point, that it's all illusion, right? I think a lot of people stop at pain, but we cannot stop at pain, right? Vedic thought, it says that you, me, and us, that we're this one thing called consciousness, and that consciousness, it gets trapped inside a body, and that body, it takes all that is exposed to it, and it projects it into the world, just like you will take a projector and throw an image on a wall and see action. Vedic thought, it says that all of creation is illusory. And the man, he says, love your brother who is yourself. And I thought that was pretty profound, right? They're almost saying the same thing, because if you are me and she is us and we are we, then who are we to hate and to murder and to rob and to trample and to break that which we imagine is not us? Because we are all us. In fact, we are all I, right? So I think that it's one thing to think about these things and to know them for ideas in a man's head, but it's another thing to try to actualize it, right? To try to see it as a man lives his life from day to day, right? When I talk to a man, or I talk to a person, or I interact with my family, to recognize in that instant that we are one thing, that the thing that's communicating and the thing that it's communicating to, that they are the same. That in man, God hides from himself.